The gloves are certainly off in the US election, and beyond the acrimony, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump in the White House, the results will inevitably have global implications. So what does this vote mean for Europe, an historically close ally of the United States? Well, that's what we're going to discuss in this special edition of the Global Conversation, where we'll be hearing from three great guests. For geopolitical perspective, Alexander Stubb, former Prime Minister of Finland. For economic perspective, Pascal Lamy, previous Director General of the World Trade Organization. And on cultural issues, celebrated film director and social commentator Ken Loach. And I'm joined from Finland by Mr. Alexander Stubb. Many thanks for being with us on the Global Conversation. As you know, we're taking a European perspective on the US election. So with that in mind, what would you like the foreign policy priorities of the next President of the United States to be?
Well, if I was to define it in two words, one would be engaged and the other one would be international. I think it's very important for us Europeans to see an engaged United States, whether that is in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, in Africa, or anywhere else. We need close allies. We need the United States and the European Union to go hip by hip.
OK, so then in that case, how would you characterize a presidency, a potential presidency of a Donald Trump or a Hillary Clinton?
Well, one will be engaged, the other one will probably be disengaged. I know Hillary Clinton personally. I was foreign minister at the same time when she was foreign secretary. I'm very impressed with her foreign policy knowledge and also her engagement. She'll probably be even more engaged than President Obama. I do not know Donald Trump, but from what I hear, we're talking about building walls, we're talking about protectionist measures, we're talking about nationalist measures, we're talking about withdrawal of American troops. So I think from a European perspective, to be quite honest, if he were to hold true to his thesis, that would spell trouble.
So they haven't really talked about us here in Europe a great deal, or if at all, in the debates. So what do you think the relationship would be with Europe? Because here we're at the point of conjecture, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, if Hillary Clinton were to be elected president of the United States, you will see a much more engaged United States. They will not withdraw from NATO. They will probably not start withdrawing troops from Europe. They will see Europe as a close ally and a partner, for instance, in negotiations in the Middle East or indeed in war in Syria or in the fight against terrorism. I think if Donald Trump is chosen, that'll be a shock to the whole system. I mean, and Europeans actually follow American presidential elections very closely. I think a lot of people will be scared by the rhetoric that Donald Trump puts forward. We have obviously seen similar rhetoric here in Europe as well, but I think Donald Trump is in a league of his own.
Well, you mentioned NATO. Donald Trump has actually questioned the very existence of NATO. Do you think in that case it's important now really for Europe to come up with its own defence force?
Well, I definitely think that Europe should work on its own defence policy. There's no question about that. But at the same time, we have to remember that 22 out of 28 EU member states are also members of NATO. 95% of the EU population is in NATO, and that will probably continue to be the bedrock of European defence for the foreseeable future. I do understand Americans who make an argument that perhaps it's time to slowly tone down engagement there. But I think it's in American interest. If you look at reactions and behavior of Russia, if you look at the war in Syria, to actually stay engaged in NATO.
You brought up the issue of Russia, and that's obviously important to Finland. You share a long border with Russia. Relations with Russia have plummeted. Do we need to press that reset button with Moscow, with President Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, definitely. I think we were under the illusion, say, from 1991 to 2000, that Russia would become, to a certain extent, a normal and engaged democracy in the international community. But then we saw with the war in Georgia 2008, and especially with the crisis in Ukraine, that that was not going to be the case. I think Russia came back to the international table again with their engagement in Syria. We have obviously strongly condemned actions in Aleppo with President President Assad at this particular moment. But I think the West, Europe, the United States understands that there's probably no solution to Syria without Russian engagement. And I think that the sooner we press the reset button and find a common tone with Russia, I think the better off we are. But at the same time, I do believe that our foreign policy should be principled.
Do you think Hillary Clinton would be able to repress that reset button? She did try a good few years ago. Donald Trump, on the other hand, says he's got a great relationship with Vladimir Putin, whether that's true or not. Maybe he's the one who's more capable of actually negotiating or renegotiating that relationship.
Well, I don't think that would actually be the case. Must remember that Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, was foreign minister at the same time with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. So they know each other very well. And obviously Russia, the Russian regime in general, knows what the current establishment is. If Russia is looking for stability in foreign policy, continuation, and to a certain extent, I think credible engagement, then they should be pushing for Hillary Clinton. If they want instability and insecurity in the world, then they should be looking at Donald Trump. I think this would have global ramifications, and the Russians know that as well.
So when it comes to ISIL, well, the so-called Islamic State, who would you say has the upper hand in dealing with this terrorist organisation? Would it be Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton?
Well, probably as a foreign prime minister, in my previous capacity, I would have had to say that we'll deal with whoever is elected. But I think it's quite self-evident, let's be clear about it. Clinton is a much safer pair of hands. The rhetoric of Trump might be tough against terrorism, but it's not enough just to say that I will destroy ISIS. You also have to say how you will do that and how you're engaged. And usually that requires diplomatic skill, and I haven't seen much of that with Donald Trump, to be quite honest.
And finally, who would you say, and I think I can probably guess the answer by now, who would make Europe a safer place? Would it be Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton at the helm of the United States?
I would definitely argue that it would be Hillary Clinton. She's not only a safe pair of hands, but she's also an experienced set of hands. And on top of that, I think she has her values right when it comes to a defense of liberal democracy, a defense of market economy, and also a defense of globalization. So if I had a chance as a Finn to vote, I'm sure I would vote for Hillary Clinton. But hey, it's not my business. I will be influenced by it. It is the American people who decide.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks.
When it comes to the economy, we've all heard the expression that if the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. Well, that's certainly true for Europe, as recent history shows all too well. To discuss the economic impact of this vote for Europe, I went to Paris to meet with former WTO leader Pascal Lamy. Pascal Lamy, many thanks for joining us on the Global Conversation. Well, it's often said that elections are won and lost on economic issues. Well, when it comes to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, you can't say that they agree on much, but they do seem to share this scepticism when it comes to globalization. So would you say that whoever is the next incumbent of the White House, that will be entering a more protectionist era?
I think Trump would be protectionist, and Clinton would be less trade open than her predecessors. So on the one side, it probably would be actively protectionist, raising tariffs, barriers, walls, whatever. And she would be probably more passive, a bit Obama-like in a way, certainly less Bill Clinton pro-trade.
If there is this drawback, this pullback towards a more protectionist kind of policies by both candidates to a lesser or greater degree, what will the impact on Europe be?
I think the overall impact, either of more protectionism or of less trade openness, will be less growth. Less growth for the US economy, hence less growth for the world economy, hence less growth for the European economy. So I have no doubt that slowing down trade through protectionism leads to worse economic results for everybody. And by the way, that will also be true for China or Africa or Indonesia, given the huge importance of the US economy in the world economy.
Changing tack slightly and looking at Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton, in very broad terms, is said to represent continuity. We know markets like predictability. Donald Trump is change. But Donald Trump is also said to be an astute businessman, a successful businessman. So surely he might have the edge on Hillary Clinton when it comes to the economy of the United States.
Good business people don't always make good trade negotiators and the other way around. And I personally believe, by the way, that if Trump was to be elected, the system, the US Constitution, the relationship with Congress, the disciplines which US has subscribed internationally, notably with WTO, would prevent him from enforcing two-thirds of what he says he had in mind. Not least because, you know, if you become the US president, you have to behave from time to time.
Well, let's look at some specifics then. So the trade agreement between the EU and the United States, TTIP, that seems to have run into a lot of trouble. It's unpopular on both sides of the Atlantic, and it doesn't look like President Obama will be able to push that through before the end of his presidency. Do you think that's just going to be dumped now by both candidates, Trump and Clinton?
No. I don't think it's going to be dumped. I don't think it will die. It will simply take time. And by the way, I've always thought and said...
Either candidate?
Of course. But from the very beginning, when I recovered my freedom of speech, when I left WTO in 2013, from the very beginning I said, those who believe this can be done in what they said, quote unquote, a tank of gas, had smoking something. It's so complex, it's so big, that pretending you can do that short term is just a dream.
And what about this pivot east? When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she was one of the people who championed this pivot east in terms of trade towards China in particular, which for some was also a sign of a turning away from Europe. So could we see then, if Donald Trump were to become president, he's been pretty vociferous in his criticism of China, that could actually benefit Europe ultimately?
I think these are for dinner speeches. The reality in economics, in trade, is size, weight, numbers. And the fact that the world economy is much more Asia than in the past will not change. And if anything, in the 10 or 20 years to come, it's going to be more and more of Asia and less of Europe, relatively, and US, by the way. And, you know, and then the next wave will be Africa, and there will be more and more Africa, and relatively less and less Asia. So that will not change.
So I would like you to give me a salient, strong point why you might choose, if you were voting in the US, to vote for Donald Trump in economic terms, and why you might choose to vote for Hillary Clinton.
That's a hard question.
I know.
A hard question because, you know, I listen to what Trump says, I read what he tweets, and it doesn't make sense. I don't think it would be good for the US, and I don't think it would be good for Europe or for the rest of the world.
So there's nothing there where you just kind of go, well, that's a nugget.
It's economy reality like you have a reality TV. It's another world. It's a world of dream, it's a world of fancies, but it's not the real world. Now, I think Hillary Clinton is much more in the real world. I think there's no doubt for Europe, for the world, for the US, she's a safe pair of hands.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Good.
Ken Loach is a celebrated director and has won awards around the world for his films that present a harsh critique of society, often broaching with stark realism themes of poverty and inequality, themes relevant on both sides of the Atlantic. Well, my colleague Effie Kutsakosta caught up with Ken Loach in Brussels for the 10th anniversary of the Lux Prize.
Mr. Loach, many thanks for being on Global Conversation.
Okay.
Your latest film, I, Daniel Blake, speaks about a man's battle to get some welfare benefits. So why did you choose this topic now, and how close to the reality in Europe and the United States is your story?
It's a man who's had a heart attack. He's unfit to work. He can't work. He's too ill. But the state tells him that he has to work in order to have the money to survive. And so it's what happens to him and a woman he meets in a similar, complicated story, but a similar situation. And what is interesting to us is that it demonstrates that there's a system in place, an economic system in place, which denies dignity, denies the means of life to millions of its people in each country. Mass unemployment, mass underemployment, you know, where people still need support from the state, even though they're working because the wages are so low, or they're only working 2 days a week. So we're in the grip of an economic system that doesn't work.
Do you see that this system has reached its limits for the poorest part of the society?
Well, who knows how far they can drive people down. They keep driving people down. I mean, it's what we've called neoliberalism, isn't it? And it's destroyed Greece, destroyed the lives of many people, while big business is unregulated, and we get grotesque inequality.
The thing is that if we see the big picture and the last figures from the big organizations like OECD, we see that there is a big gap which has widened over the years between the richest and the poorest. And we've seen that, okay, there was a crisis also in the West, in the Europe and in the United States, where people paid the price, but the richest part, the small part of the population has become even richer.
Yeah.
What went wrong? What is going wrong?
Well, it's gone right for them. This is their system. This is what they want. This is the logic of the big corporations having unlimited power. They will cut the cost of labor. They will get the raw materials the cheapest they can, and they will compete with each other for market share. The rewards are huge, and the penalty, the cost for the working class people is immense. But this isn't their system working badly. This is how it works, and I think the only way we can change it is to change the economic model completely.
What about racism and discrimination? Because we also see some movements in the United States with the Black Lives Matters. Because maybe, okay, we have the first Afro-American president in the history, Barack Obama, but we saw that the police violence against black people in the United States has risen.
People behave in racist ways, and racism gets hold when people are again despairing. When there's, I mean, generosity with each other comes when people are strong, doesn't it? Generosity is, they say, is strength to spare, and people are generous with each other and tolerant of each other and work together when they're confident, when they're secure, when they're not anxious about their future. So you need an economic system that provides that, provides security, and then people will. Our natural way to live is as good neighbours, isn't it? I mean, if you're short of a pint of milk, you can come and borrow it from me, you know, or if I'm locked out, I'll climb in through your window to get to my flat. I mean, we're just good neighbours. But when people are angry, alienated, in trouble, then their generosity shrivels.
And we have the American elections. How do you think the result of these elections could affect Europe?
Well, I think if it's Hillary Clinton, it will carry on as before. It'll just be business as usual. It'll be a hard-nosed, pro-business government. If Trump wins, God help us. I mean, just take cover, I think. The idea that that man having his finger anywhere near a nuclear button is the stuff of nightmares, isn't it? I mean, if Clinton wins, it'll be, it's still bad news because she will still drive through the interests of American capital.
Okay, Mr. Loach, many thanks for being with us.
Okay, thank you.
That's all for now. Thanks for watching this special edition of The Global Conversation. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, you can catch up with us on social media.